Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Today's special guest is Jamie Boldt, and boy, did he pick a winner to review today. October 31st, 1995, Halloween at the Rosemont Horizon in Chicago, Illinois. Regular listeners of Attendance Bias will note that The Who was the band for me as I made the transition from classic rock and alternative radio in my early teens to exploring the world beyond the corporate record stores and top 40 radio. To put it another way, for me, before Phish, there was The Who. As you'll hear Jamie and I discuss in just a little while, it was a major turning point for me when I found out about this Halloween show. In the bigger picture, this was Phish's second Halloween musical costume. After the unmitigated success of the White Album Halloween show in 1994, the band chose to go a different route, playing a huge venue in the Midwest as opposed to a smaller venue in the Northeast, and this time choosing a relatively obscure album that required additional musicians. But there's more to this show than the musical costume. The first and third sets are masterpieces that stand on their own. Jamie chose to discuss this show for a number of reasons. One of them is that he wanted to get my take on the convergence of Phish and The Who. While I am the host of this podcast and I get my thoughts in there, Jamie is the guest, and we get to hear what it was like to witness this epic show that continues to live on the top shelf of Phish history. So let's join Jamie to talk about Greenwich Village, mod culture, and John Fishman's relatives as we discuss October 31st, 1995 in Chicago, Illinois. Jamie, welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to talking about this.
My absolute pleasure. I'm so glad you brought up this show. In the history of Attendance Bias episodes, I'm somewhere in the 150s right now of how many episodes I've covered with guests, and it's just the golden plum hanging there. You know, I was not at this show, but it's lived in my memory almost as long as I've been a Phish fan. As soon as I found out about it, that it even occurred. But we'll get more into that later. But I'm so glad that you chose this. For those of you listening who just pressed play on the latest episode and didn't read, today's show that Jamie chose was Halloween 1995, October 31st, 1995, at the Rosemont Horizon in Chicago, famously where Phish, during their second set, played the entirety of The Who's Quadrophenia. Oh, I'm almost exhausted, just the energy that's building up on me getting ready to talk about it.
I'm excited to hear you talk about
it. Well, I'm going to
have to put... As a Who fan.
Yeah, as a Who fan. And for those of you listening who may be newer listeners, before Phish in my lifetime, there was The Who. This was a huge revelation for me to find out that the two bands converged, at least on one night, and certainly bits and pieces before and after. But this really solidified it for me that the age of The Who was over, the age of Phish has now started, to paraphrase Lord of the Rings. But this is not my episode. It's not about me. Jamie, it's about you. So let's get to know you as a fan with the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Jamie, when was your first Phish show and what do you remember about it?
First Phish show was the OJ show, 6/17/94. Legendary show. I remember it being in a small room in Milwaukee, which is where I'm from. Chaos. Just seeing a band that you had listened to on tape and worn tapes out for years, finally getting a chance to listen to them. I was 17 at the time, so I hadn't seen them before. Got a chance to see that show, and it was just everything you wanted. It was everything you wanted. You know, for those that don't know, OJ was on the run. He was in the White Bronco as this thing was happening. None of us knew really what was going on. So when the second set kicks off and he starts laying into Run, OJ, Run, we didn't know what was going on. All we saw was smoke and strobes in that 2001, and off we went. It was spectacular. It actually led me to go the next night, the vaunted 6/18/94 down at UIC. I can never get that time back. Just what a special time to go see this band.
So you mentioned that you were wearing out tapes before you got to see them, and that was in 1994. Where were you as a Phish head leading into your first show? Like, how familiar were you? What were some of your favorite tapes? What was your pedigree?
I was Very familiar, very familiar. So 11,290, 11,490, 322.93. I think Red Rocks 93 had made the rounds by that time. Those are the ones that 421.92. That I wore out instantly. That is the show for me pre, this 93 run of just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Those were the shows. I was very familiar with all the songs, everything. We had the albums, we had the tapes, we had older brothers that gave this or passed it down to us, and it was gospel at that point. It was great.
Moving closer to the recent past, what was your most recent Phish show, and what did you think of it?
Most recent Phish show was Dick's last summer, last Labor Day. It was great. I was really fortunate. I got number 3 in the lottery. So I was a first night on night 1. So I was on the rail night 1. Had never really gotten there, like right in between Trey and Mike. That was a great show, but I would really lean into the third night. That 46 Days Howling Piper. I don't know why that show isn't talked about more in terms of the 2023 great shows. It was a phenomenal show with a fluffhead opener that was 20 plus minutes. The whole second set really was a beautiful segue. You could say the third set, which was the encore, which is about 40 some minutes. It was just
Right.
one of those shows. I will not forget that show.
Well, since today's show that you chose is a Halloween show, their second musical cover, the musical costume Halloween, if you could choose Phish's next Halloween cover album, what would you pick?
Brian, I got to tell you, when you asked me this question, you ruined my day/night. Everything's flooding through of all the things they have teased and have kind of played in segments. It would be a shame if we never got a full Zeppelin album. I think that's something that would really, I know they've come close and they've put them together, but never front to back. Physical Graffiti by Phish would be one of the greatest highlights of one's life, I feel. Bring in Radiohead, playing OK Computer. It'd be tough, but I think that listen would be fantastic. And then bringing it maybe a little more current. My Morning Jacket, It Still Moves, would be an absolute ripper. I know Trey's played with them before down in Mexico
Yep.
as a couple of years ago, and I thought that went off really well. I mean, they seem to really, really balance well. So I think any of those three would just be. But as we know, we'll take what we can get at this point.
I have to ask you, based on the bands that you chose, when you said Led Zeppelin and Radiohead, the first two, and you said it'd be a little rough, I was going to say, what would you suggest about the vocals? Because I love Phish. God love him like one loves a child. But if you love your child enough, you could also admit his faults.
There are limitations. There
Yeah.
are limitations. And, the electronic aspect of OK Computer, that'd be tough to duplicate. We saw that at the Baker's Dozen. It wasn't the best cover they chose.
But
In
they
my
did it
opinion.
the way they should do it. They did it their way.
Exactly. And we wouldn't have it any other way, right?
Right. And speaking of vocals, when we get to the discussion about Quadrophenia,
Ooh.
yeah, we'll get there. We'll get
Yeah,
there.
we will.
Okay, well, if you could pick those two, what of the ones they've done, what's been your favorite Phish Halloween show other than this one?
Yeah, it's got to be Remain in Light for me. That was just such a turning point in the band's history. It was and it happened in '96 too, which was so odd because of the transitioning year, but it was just so perfect. You'd be a fool not to say the Beatles, '94 or '96. Those are really my two. And bringing it more recently, the Rolling Stones album that thing shredded.
Yeah.
That was great. That was great.
A lot of us look at 96, especially that show, The Remain in Light, and we say, it was a turning point. 96 was a transitional year. 96 was so great. And I've been exposed to a lot more Phish music from 1996 doing this podcast than I otherwise would probably be interested in. I have a feeling that it didn't really become a transitional year until they played that Halloween show. Everything before it was just rock and music.
Yeah, that's a great point. I did the Alpine to Clifford Ball run in that summer of '96, and I would have had no idea that they were undergoing the changes they did eventually. When they hit fall, it got a little weird. A
Yeah.
little, they adjusting to the arena size, which we'll touch on today as well. Going into Rosemont, that was 20,000 people, and they were doing that on the everyday basis in that fall of '96. It was just learning how to play a room like that. Really, I think what it came down to. And then Trey introduced the mini kit, which took things in different directions.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we could talk about 96 forever, but we'll stay focused on at least the last quarter of 95. Well, if your favorite Phish Halloween show is probably 96 with a nod to the White Album in 1994, what was your least favorite Phish Halloween show?
Sci-Fi Soldier for me was rough. That was a rough one. I appreciate what they did. Harkening back to Dick's, one of my favorite things to come out of that was the howling. If you were in that crowd on that floor when the howling hit at Dick's, there was nothing like it. Like I'm getting goosebumps just thinking of it. It was the absolute dirtiest dance party I have seen at a Phish show or been part of. It was phenomenal. That said, it was a rough one. It was a rough one.
It's got to be the Sci-Fi Soldier set that is the most controversial or split decision Phish show since at least Wingsuit, right?
Yeah, and I would take Wingsuit. I don't mind Wingsuit. There was some good material there. Sci-Fi Soldier seemed forced. I guess is maybe the word I'll use.
What is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
One of the things that will forever stay with me was a show at Blossom in 1995. So if you've ever been to Blossom, it's one of the most beautiful venues out there. You roll through a park for about 20 minutes. It's really, really, it's a pretty venue. So you've got the bowl kind of covering the seated area, and you've got these two arches that angle up to the top of that bowl for rain and whatnot for cover. During the encore, Highway to Hell, some dude decided to walk up there
Oh
and
no.
stood right at the edge of that covering and just raged. And I couldn't take my eyes off it. I couldn't believe it. I probably had some stuff in my head, and I'm just staring at this guy like, oh my God, he's going to fall. He's going to fall. And he didn't, and they rocked the out of Highway to Hell, and that was the show, and he somehow got down, and that was definitely the most, like, woo, white knuckle, can't believe that happened moment, for sure.
When was this show played?
Jamie, let's take a look at the October 1995 segment of the Fall 95 tour. Not by far, it is not the first 1995 Fall 95 show that we've talked about on this podcast, but just to give a quick overall view of the tour, it's reached legendary status in the band's history. I think that it consisted of 54 shows. It seems like you could reach into a bucket and pull out any date and be talking about someone's best show ever when it comes to the fall of 95. It started in September in Sacramento and ended in December in Lake Placid in upstate New York. So it truly was a full fall tour. And to your point earlier, Fall 95 really emphasized, even if it didn't solidify it, it really emphasized that the band was making that leap from theaters and larger venues to full on arena tours, coast to coast, that they were still playing theaters in areas where they were less popular, but you could tell the next time they came through, it didn't matter if they were popular or not in the area. The promoter was going to put them in the arena of choice there. And of course, we could talk about the recent death of Jerry Garcia, opening the fan base or adding people onto the fan base. But I know there's like a billion different opinions on that.
It definitely increased the lot scene for sure. I don't know if those people made it into the venues. I was living out in Colorado at the time of this tour, and I went to Arizona 10/11/95, which was 2 weeks before this Halloween show. Sold out 18,000. You could walk into this venue and walk right to the front of the stage, touch the rail, walk around, go back, do it again all night if you wanted to. It was a really interesting time. And then earlier that summer, having seen them at Deer Creek and Blossom. I mean, it was really, really, it was weird in hindsight.
Yeah, there's a huge disparity depending on what state or region you're in. So at the beginning of the fall tour, the Donnerstag Schweiss, the fan newsletter, told fans that they would have the opportunity to vote on the band's second, in quotes, musical costume, which turned out to be Quadrophenia, of course. And also just some side notes, some songs, this is not the full list, but some songs that were debuted during just this tour, not 95 in general. Cars, Trucks, and Buses, Taste, Billy Breathes, Keyboard Cavalry, which was kind of common, and it would come and then it would disappear and not come back again until years later at Dick's. Hello, My Baby, and of course, every song from Quadrophenia, of which the only ones that have stuck around were Drowned and I think Sea and Sand. And The Real Me, I guess, got sandwiched in December in the middle of the Bathtub Gin, but that's kind of happenstance more than anything else. Who were you, Jamie, and where were you in the fall of 95 that led you to this show?
I was a freshman living in Gunnison, Colorado, going to Western State, living that Colorado lifestyle as an 18-year-old, not sure what you wanted to do. I didn't last long out there, I'll tell you that. Pulled the plug on that fairly quickly, as you know, I was having a good time. That's what I was doing in the fall of '95. Drove down to Arizona, go to see them. Flew to Chicago to go see them in Chicago. I was jumping on board, that's for sure, in terms of in the world of Phish.
And how closely were you following their music? Because I know sometimes when we were collecting tapes, I would sometimes have to wait 4 to 6 or 8 months before I got a tape of the most recent show. Because Phish in 1994, when you saw them for the first time, and then your tapes going way back to like 92 or 1990, was very different than Phish in 1995. They were really starting to push boundaries. Like 94 wasn't exactly easy listening walk in the park either, but it was mostly like Trey-led guitar, Machine Gun Trey madness. But 1995, as we'll talk about in the You Enjoy Myself, could really go to some odd places that they would push the audience like, can you hang with us? We see how big you're getting, but will you stick around if we do this weird thing? How were you surprised in 1995 compared to what you saw in 1994?
For sure, they were really stretching things out. They were really getting their sea legs, so to speak. And to your point, when you saw them in '94, there weren't any outside of like the Bowie 12/29/94. There weren't any big monster jams. I shouldn't say there weren't any. I know you'll fact check me on that one. They'd stretch a little bit, but it was a pretty standard. It was a pretty standard show. Great songs. Every performance, as we know, was different. But there weren't, I that funky bit from 11/22/94. There were some the Simple from 11/16/94. They were starting to stretch. I didn't know about those at the time. I had met a taper in '95 out in Colorado, so we were getting some fairly recent things, to the point where when I went to the Halloween show, we knew they were teasing Michael Jackson a lot. Like we had known that going into the show. We knew they liked to play with the crowd, right? Like we didn't know if that was going to happen, but we definitely knew that the word on the street was out. They were teasing "Beat It" in Black and White, and I think those were like the two main teasers they're dropping. But we weren't fully up to date, as the internet hadn't really like exploded yet. But we knew what was going on. Generally speaking, we didn't know we would see a 40-minute yem. I'll tell you that.
Well, who would? I mean,
Who would, right?
I mean, like I said earlier, at the time of this recording, right? This is in late February of 2024. We didn't know that we were going to hear a 40-minute Chalktus Torture a couple days ago.
Right, with a Wave of Hope that was just under 40 the night before.
Right.
What a time.
Right. Whether it's 1995 or 2024, we're still delightfully surprised.
Still guessing. Yeah.
So, Jamie, of all the shows you've seen since the summer of '94, why did you pick this show for attendance bias? Why do you have attendance bias toward this performance?
Yeah, a few reasons. One would be that I got to know a guy who turned out, I didn't know at the time when I first met him, but he turned out to be Trey's stepbrother. So I had the opportunity to sit in the family section for this show, which was in like row 10. I sat next to Tom Marshall. Didn't know at the time. I didn't know who Tom Marshall was. and definitely John Fishman's brother behind me. That's for sure. He was related to John Fishman. I'll say that.
Mhm.
You can't. That's not a mistaken face. I'll put it that way. So got to go backstage. Second being it's Halloween. I've been to 2 Halloween shows. I went to Vegas in '98 and this one. And if you get the opportunity to go to a Phish Halloween show, you take it. You absolutely take it. Another reason being, I wanted to hear you talk about the Who. I could feel all this pent up emotion. You needed to talk about this. So if I can add some context, that's all I'm hoping to do.
Well, I appreciate that second reason. I mean, I appreciate the first reason too, but I appreciate that. And I've thought about that a lot with talking about the Who on here. I've read so much about them. I mean, the reason I feel so much more comfortable talking about Phish is because I've lived it, right? I mean, Phish is of my time. The Who were
Right.
broken up from their second drummer the year I was born. I would have to have a podcast for attendance bias for someone who's probably my dad's age, who's turning
Right.
75, to tell me what it was like to go see the Who in their prime. So all I know is mostly academic and from what I've heard or seen from 1996 on, but I'm happy to provide any context I can for Quadrophenia.
Can't wait.
Set 1.
Well, to move on to the show, for those of you listening, what we normally do here on Attendance Bias for 3 set shows or festivals is I usually ask the guest to pick a few highlights from each set. That way we're not going over a long 3 set show, and this is not going to be a 2.5 hour long podcast episode. And Jamie came through in fine fashion, especially for a show that is not short on highlights. Even without Quadrophenia, right? A double disc, a double record middle set. You could talk about the whole first and third set as a complete masterpiece show.
100%. If this was a 2-set show, I'm all in.
Right, me too. And you would be lucky to be there.
Yeah.
And
really and to be able to look at these band members in the eyes, just being that close and just seeing the intensity. And we'll talk about that during set 2 that they brought to the stage. It was something, man.
Well, set 1 starts right away. When you said if you get the chance to go see a Phish Halloween show, you better take it. Nothing could say it better than this first track. They open the show with Iculus.
Iculus. Allegedly a Brad Sands request. It's his birthday, as we found out on 10/31/94 with the cake coming out. Apparently this was his request, and thank God for Brad. He set the tone.
And yeah, what a tone. I mean, if Halloween is trick or treats, when you hear that they're starting Iculus, even as many times as I've heard this show and listening again recently to talk to you, I still got the chills.
The energy in that room before they even hit a note was off the charts. And then you get that light strumming. It just popped. I mean, it was really I get goosebumps just talking about it. It was there was so much energy. I cannot stress it enough. It was off the charts. That's all I can say.
And the story for this version of Iculus, Trey starts talking about how if you read the book, everything will be fine. And he's setting the tone, like you said, but it abruptly changes about 3 minutes in. Trey says that he doesn't think the book is going to work tonight. It's getting too weird. There's too many evil Halloween spirits in the air. So it's super fun. So even immediately, the really fun rarity that everyone loves with narration is a little bit off. We already know it's Halloween. Nothing can be straight right now.
Yeah, in the moment, I was thinking like something's wrong. Like, why are we cutting this off? What happened? What happened? I think he just wanted to yell, "Book, spirits, book." I think that I need that as a ringtone, by the way. Um, yeah, once that kind of came to a conclusion, those chords of Divided Sky came up. Mm,
Yeah, that
mm,
Divided Sky. I always think of my favorite Divided Sky being Halloween 94.
right.
And that one is spectacular. This one is a perfect optimistic follow up to Iculus, which is very unsettling, like Iculus was. And it takes me back, like I said, to Halloween 94, but the speed and energy kicked this one up a notch, which everything in 1995 was. It was a little
Yeah.
bit faster, it was a little bit more bombastic in 95 than it was in previous years. And I don't know if I should use this word for the whole song, but at around 7 minutes, this Divided Sky is aggressive.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in my notes that I wrote to myself, I mean, by the 10-minute mark, Trey was just throwing fire off that stage. He was just hammering this thing. Three definitive peaks were hit. There was a Divided Sky tease in the Divided Sky, which go ahead, man, do it. And yeah, the crowd was just into it. This just kept the energy just ratcheted up. It just kept going.
I had that same note at 11 minutes. I read there's a 99-mile-per-hour jam that keeps doubling back on itself.
Yeah, it was incredible. It was incredible. It's one of those songs that I know I take for granted. This one was just, it was note for note spot on. There was no flubs. There was none of that. It was just straight fire. And I take it for granted. And, just going back and re-listening to this, I fell in love with that song again. And it's not hard to, because that thing is a masterpiece. You don't see too many Phish cover bands covering that one.
Yeah, or at least covering it well. That's
Right.
for sure.
Right.
A little bit later in the set is Gaiuti, which is played for the first time since December 29th, 94. And there's a huge cheer from the opening line. Talk about taking songs for granted. I think
Right.
as a fan base, we take Gaiuti for granted because, especially since this performance, when it's performed in its what I guess modern format, right? It was kind of to quote my grandpa, kind of futzed around with when it was being played with in 94. They put it on hiatus for a while, tweaked it, practiced it, and then it's played in its final form here, the version we're familiar with. And the crowd goes insane. If whether you personally or you as a whole, as the Phish audience, must have been thrilled to have it back, because by this point, Phish wasn't still playing or writing multi-segment fugue strange multi-part instrumental pieces. And
Yeah,
Gaiute was kind of a
absolutely.
throwback to that.
Absolutely. And if you saw him in the fall of 94, there was no chance you didn't see this song live. I think they were playing it every other show at that point, if not more. But yeah, you're right. It was, that multi part with the big, big ending to it. Everybody looked forward to that, and they crushed it on this one. Fishman ended it a little bit early. He hit the splash cymbals 3 times and recovered really nicely at the tail end. That was pretty funny hearing that upon re-listen. But yeah, they crushed it. I mean, you could tell they practiced. That's for sure.
Yeah, I wrote the same thing. I said the same thing. I wrote, this is obviously very practiced. There's not much to clip, there's not much to clip and play as a highlight because anyone listening to this podcast knows what Gaiuti sounds like. But I did have the thought as they wrapped it up, the part that you were just talking about. Imagine being among the first of the audience to hear that big tension and release at the end that we all celebrate so much now.
Yeah. 100%, 100%. I don't, they need to bring this back. I think they're doing this like every 20, 30 shows or something now. I mean, it really, they've kind of buried it a little bit.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, it did become taken for granted. It is predictable for what it's worth,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean it's bad.
Nope, not at all. Not at all. Again, another song that people don't even have. They don't have it. They can't cover this one.
And you brought up before we hit record, I didn't get a chance to re-listen to it, but you brought up Run Like an Antelope, which is during the first set, right? Tell us a little bit about why that popped into your head.
This one is spectacular. It's peak after peak after peak. It's 1 week after the vaunted Madison 1024-95 version, which just keeps going. If you haven't heard that version, stop what you're doing, get to a padded room, and throw that thing on because that will make you run through a wall. But at this point in their career, they were playing this song so frequently, but in this 95 pocket, the energy and the peaks that they were hitting on it were second to none. I mean, they're doing a lot of great things these days. They're not doing Antelope as well as they did. Along with Bowie, those are two sacrifices they've made as well. But this
I think they've just kicked the shit out of those songs so much.
Yeah, there's not much more they can do to it.
Let them stay down. They don't owe us anything.
100%. 100%.
And to fast forward a little bit to the end of the set, so you have a set that opens with Iculus and then it closes with Harpua.
Ridiculous.
You want to talk about flexing your stats a little bit?
Yeah, ridiculous. They had really dialed back Harpua at this point. There had been, I think, maybe three or two or three in '95, and then just three in '96. With they were saving it for those big shows. I think it was Clifford Ball, Vegas '96, this show, and then they did at Waterloo 6/23/95. I think was the only other Harpua. But yeah, we got a little taste of just how nuts Mike is. His story,
Oh yeah,
fantastic.
I can't imagine what else. Although before Mike even talks, this Harpua is a little extra gross where Trey's telling the story and Harpua, he's a bulldog, has extra mucus on his face. When you imagine the story of Harpua, that never crossed my mind. But now that it's
No,
Halloween, it's got to be a little scarier.
it's got to be a little scary, and he nailed it. He nailed it.
Yeah, and Mike, to your point, Jamie tells this in you wrote, you get a little insight into how weird he is. You said, I wrote, yeah, Mike is telling his weirdo raccoon nightmare, which to me is an obvious nod to Rocky Raccoon from the White Album, right?
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. Another thing I need in my phone is Mike yelling "baby raccoons." That
Yeah,
it never gets old. Never gets old.
yeah. And just to put a cherry on it, my last note from that segment of Harpua is Mike must be one of the weirdest human beings alive.
Yep, nailed it. Nailed it. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. But then also in this Harpua, they hit the Michael Jackson "Beat It" tease.
Right. After Mike Gordon tells his weirdo story about being attacked by raccoons or opening a door to see a room full of raccoons, the narration does turn back to Jimmy. And Trey says Jimmy wasn't dreaming the dream. He was playing an album instead that Phish was playing at the Rosemont Horizon. And it's Beat It, right. And it's a great tease because it sounds awesome.
One person wasn't dreaming the dream, and that one person was Jimmy. Jimmy wasn't dreaming the dream because Jimmy wasn't asleep. Jimmy was actually sitting on the couch with his little pussycat posted up down. Jimmy was sitting with Poster Nutbag and playing his favorite album, which, lo, was the very same album that Phish was playing as their Halloween album at Rosemont Horizon that night. When suddenly Poster Nutbag runs outside, encounters Harpua, they battle.
Yeah, it does, and that it was just it was sitting there for us. I would have loved to have heard that. I would have loved to have heard the Thriller album. That would have been such a treat. It was either at this point or right before they kicked off Quadrophenia, where they teased Beat It, and 18-year-old me turns around with my just mouth agape, eyes wide open, big as saucers, and I turn around. The first person I saw was John Fishman's brother or relative of some sort, and my mouth is just open, and he just looks at me with this kind of shameful look and just kind of goes, "No, that's not
Oh,
it." I was like, "Oh, of course." I let my emotions get the best of me.
but
They were
it
just there
was,
to mess with us.
yeah. But what a way, though, to end an hour and 23-minute set, the
Huge
first of
set.
three.
I know. Just ridiculous.
Set two.
Well, set two, as we all know, starts, unfortunately for you, and certainly for much to your chagrin, from Fishman's yet to be identified relative, starts with a tease of it's Beat It, or is it?
Yeah,
It's the beginning of Thriller. It's the beginning of the Thriller album.
yeah.
And
Yeah, yeah.
ding, 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 yeah.
There it
And
is.
so it fades out into I Am the Sea, which is kind of not quite an overture, but kind of an introduction, like a lead in, almost like something Pink Floyd would have done at around the same time, where it's the different members of the band singing their own little parts of Quadrophenia over the sound effects of waves crashing, because Quadrophenia is very much has an oceanic motif.
Yeah. I think it's important to bring up as well, there was no Phish bill at this time. I think this show probably put them on the path to put one out in '96, which they definitely did. Because I would guess more than half of this room didn't know what this was. I certainly didn't. The only time I figured out what this was when Trey was rocking the Townsend Windmill during Real Me. So he did it early, kind of let everybody know. But even then, I didn't know what album it was. I didn't know anything on this thing, right? So it was just all a brand new experience, which to me, at a Phish show, I knew all the songs, like we knew all the songs. It was just how they were going to play them. This was just a brand new experience. And the way I'll never forget when they came out on stage, there was a look in their eye. They were serious. Like Trey came out and it was there. You're used to seeing this band smile and kind of give a nod to the crowd. That was not happening here. They were taking this very serious. I know they had one night where they had the venue the night before that they practiced it with the horns. You could tell there was a little nervousness in the room, like on stage at least. They were very, very dialed in and very serious. And eventually, they warmed up and, on the back half of the set, there was a little bit, they got a little looser, but it was pretty tight.
Well, they did practice it a lot. I remember reading, but this is a serious album.
Yeah.
It's about a very niche concept, by the way, it should be noted. Even people who know the songs, and I would imagine, like you said, most people who didn't know Quadrophenia or had no idea what was going on must have recognized at least 515 or Love Reign O'er Me.
I didn't.
Really?
No idea. The Who escaped me. I never got into the Who. Tommy, none of that stuff. I just didn't get into it. So this was all new material for me. And what material it was, and what a way to showcase Page.
Oh, yeah.
I can't think of another show, and I've listened to a lot of shows. I can't think of another show that had Page so upfront. Like this was Page centric, to say the least.
Well, Roger Daltrey's voice and Pete Townsend's voice, especially, not that Page has the most, robust rock star rage it out voice, but it is the highest voice in the band.
Yep.
In terms of pitch. And Roger Daltrey's voice, for as famous as it's become for his screams and his, I used this word before, but his bombastic delivery, it is fairly high pitched. And so is Pete Townsend's. So Page was the go-to guy for this. And as I understand it from previous interviews, the Who were one of his favorite bands, especially in college. So he felt this in his bones.
Yeah, and I think it was his pick too, if I remember correctly. I think he was the force behind getting this one on stage.
And they also reached out to Roger Daltrey himself.
Did they really?
Yeah. They reached out to Roger Daltrey and he turned them down. And there was a funny running joke that in 1996, I think it was in the summer of 96, I could be wrong on that, there was a big, huge concert in England called the Prince's Trust, the concert for the Prince's Trust. And the Who, although they didn't call themselves the Who, they reunited for the Prince's Trust and they played all of Quadrophenia. So the joke became then, that in future Phish bills, that John Fishman's vocals and his performance was so astounding that it inspired the Who to get back together and tour with it. And that was the first time I saw the Who live, was in, I think, the fall of 1996 at the Nassau Coliseum when they were touring with Quadrophenia with Billy Idol and Gary Glitter as special guests.
Wow. That I didn't know. I did not know that they reached out to Roger Daltrey. That would have looked crazy. That would have been wild.
At the time I saw the Who in 1996, I was as excited to see them as I would be to see any Phish show for the rest of my life. That was life achievement unlocked.
Wow.
But to give you some context that you kind of mentioned earlier, so Quadrophenia is a double album. It was released in 1973 as a concept album as well, an album that told a story. It was commercially successful, but it was very well critically received. The critics loved it. It's about a very niche specific topic. So after the Who became megastars, when Tommy became a big hit, right, in 1969 and 1970, Pete Townsend almost had a nervous breakdown writing his next concept album that was going to be called Lifehouse. It became the album Who's Next, which is still the Who's probably most commercially viable album. And then after that, he wanted to get back to telling a story. Pete Townsend has said he felt by the time that Lifehouse or Who's Next was over, he felt like he was 90 years old, but he was really just like 27. He was a kid. He wrote an album about the fans that supported the Who back in their earliest days in the early 60s in Shepherd's Bush, London. And they were called mods, MODS. And they adopted a particular lifestyle. They wore heavy army coats. They rode and drove mopeds. They were very into their fashion. They used to get into big fights on the boardwalk in Brighton, and they were very much into girls. They had to have dates, and it was a very short-lived craze. And there was a little revival of it in the late 70s with the Sex Pistols. But Pete Townsend wanted to write an album as if a mod were telling what it was like to be there at that time. For those of you who might not like Quadrophenia, that's what it's about. It's from the point of view of a young man of all things named Jimmy, who and the album title comes from the idea that Jimmy doesn't just have a split personality, but he has a split twice personality. So he's not schizophrenic, he's quadrophrenic. So he has 4 different personalities, each one represented by a different member of the Who. So each member has their own theme song within the album.
It's deep, man.
Yeah, well, it was deep, certainly at the time it was written. And unless you're an enormous Who fan or you just liked the songs I mentioned before, like 515 or Love Reign Over Me, which are regularly played on classic rock radio, it's not like the mod movement was a big thing. So a lot of it was alienating, this album was, to a lot of people upon its release, especially the American audience.
Interesting. So it did not play. Did it play well here? I mean, you mentioned it was critically adored. Was that here or was that there?
Universally, the
Okay.
critics, both in England and in America, thought it was a fabulous album. But the big weakness it had going for it were twofold. Number one, the American audience had no idea what mods were, or for the most part, I should say. I don't want to generalize too much, but at least had no interest in what it was like to be a mod in 1963 with this up and coming band called the High Numbers to become the Who. But also, as you know, if you've listened to the studio album, it is extremely heavy on synthesizers and special effects for the time. And that could not yet be manipulated or repeated live. So the tour was marred from the beginning. They only went like 2 or 3 shows into the 1973 American tour before they just had to ditch like 99% of Quadrophenia.
So they never played it with the original lineup.
They never, well, I
Well,
guess
besides
that's
those 2 or
true.
3 times.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Because by the time they reunited, Keith Moon was long gone.
Yeah. Wow. And I don't see that album as a big drummer's paradise, you know?
Oh, you got to listen to it again.
Maybe I should.
There are some
I should.
songs
Really?
that, yeah, oh yeah, there are some songs I'm thinking of as Dr. Jimmy, which is on
Yeah.
side 2. There's Bellboy, which is Keith Moon's theme, which is a drummer's paradise. I mean, for him, it's a playground.
Yeah.
And when Pete Townsend was writing the album, he recorded all of the demos, which you can find now. You could buy the Quadrophenia demos. He left it very specifically sparse. He wrote all the songs. This is the only Who album, I think, where there's no credit to any other band member. But so he wrote all the songs, but he left it very basic because he didn't want to write the other band members' parts for them.
Interesting. Okay.
So
See, that's why we're doing this.
Yeah,
That's
well,
why
I mean,
we're doing this.
but that's why you and thousands of other probably 16 to 20-year-olds in Rosemont Horizon on Halloween 95 probably sat down for a good chunk of it, because it takes that kind of explanation to fully appreciate what's being performed.
I don't think there was too much sitting down, but there wasn't a lot of dancing. I guess we'll put it that way.
Right. It's a rock and roll album
Yeah,
in terms of straight arena rock, which is what Phish was becoming experts at. Like you were saying, learning to play bigger venues.
which is why it was such a great album for this particular point in time.
Yeah.
They were playing venues the size of 5,000 to 8,000, and then they come out here and they're doing 18 at Rosemont. So it was a ride.
Well, getting to the music, we're not going to go over the entire album. It's a double album, so it's quite dense, but you picked a few highlights. I also picked a few highlights because I couldn't help myself, God damn it. But it opens, we agree with the opening track, The Real Me. This song is played at an almost excessive speed compared to the Who version. You said they came on really intense and ready to go. It really comes through in the tempo of The Real Me.
Yeah, they just came out and shredded this. I mean, to not know anything and then to get sent into this orbit was like, oh, okay, here we go. Especially with the quiet lead into it with
Right.
the background, the oceanic theme. It was a ripper. And everything we're going to talk about, these should all come back. Like The Real Me. Oh, if they brought this out right now, it would be fantastic. I'm a sucker for segues, and that 12/29/95 bathtub Real Me bathtub is up there for me. It is one of those just masterpieces.
Oh yeah, it's one of their best performances ever, and it's certainly when the top 2 or 3 best segues they've ever played.
Agreed.
But I think a reason they haven't really held on to The Real Me, because one of the first things I noticed is Trey's voice is ravaged from
Yeah.
the start, whether it's the passion that he's coming through with, whether it's the length of the tour, even though they're just at about halfway, this is not within his range. And between the speed and his vocals not being able to really project, although he does a respectable version, this is, I wrote, an almost impossible example of Phish being less disciplined than the Who.
Yeah. I loved upon re-listening, I love that scratch in his voice. It's just gritty. Like you just get that grit and that intensity through that voice, and it really came through.
Yeah, it shows the passion.
Yeah.
Because a lot of Phish's playing, and they used to get ripped on this by critics early in their career, is that they were a little too sterile. They were a little too good. They're a little too talented and precise. This Real Me is the opposite. It's just something you could do in your garage with your friends if someone had the lyrics and the chords.
Yeah,
But I
absolutely.
don't want to leave out Mike's bass fills, because the middle of this song, both on the album and in this live version, are very much led by John Entwistle. It's just bass and drums for a lot of it, which is very rare in The Who. But John Entwistle is top bass player of all time, one of the, and Mike Gordon being able to respectfully mimic, but also kind of make it his own, is unbelievable to me that he could do that.
He's such a talent. He's such an underrated bass player, both John Entwistle and Mike Gordon.
Not if you ask bass players, though.
Yeah, no, I know. Entwistle is definitely up there. He's on Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. And then after The Real Me, it goes into the title track, which is not a very popular selection from this song. It's called Quadrophenia, and it's the first song on the album that explores all four musical themes, all of Jimmy's four split personalities. This, to me, is probably the most, and this is in quotes, fishy song on the album, because it's all instrumental, it's very diverse, and it has places for each member of the band to shine. So when I heard this, I'm like, oh, this is Phish, even though it's The Who.
Yeah, there's a lot of weaving in and out. I mean, it is, to your point, it's a perfect Phish song. They really they killed it. They played it really, really well. And coming back to this, because I haven't listened to this show in a long time, we were so lucky to have gotten this album. It still doesn't get the respect it should, but man, there are some gems here. This being one of them. Absolutely one of them.
And the next song coming up, which is, if you look at this song as narration, as a story, I'm sorry, this album as narration, as a story, Cut My Hair, which is pretty much as far as you can take the plot and the characters of Quadrophenia. It's mostly the exposition of Jimmy, of who he is, because the character seems to have the same hangups, the same insecurities and drives as either Pete Townsend or generic mod of the 1960s, and Pete Townsend was. He was a little bit older than the mods at the time. That's why he was in the band. He was the guy the mods looked up to. Like, it's a brutally honest song. The insight into the mindset of almost any older teenager who's mad at his parents. Why should I have to cut my hair? Here's the things that I wear to look cool, but am I really supposed to be wearing these? Do I actually look cool? It's very much about this lead character. With he even mentions a zoot suit with jacket with side vents 5 inches long. Like, that's how precise this is.
And this was the start of Page's run in terms of really showing his range in terms of what he could do. after this, I mean, it just kept going. Page was just on stage. He was just the guy.
Yeah, I agree. The first two songs, The Real Me and Quadrophenia, were, I don't want to say all Trey, but he was the one driving the bus. Once you get to Cut My Hair and much more character-based and vocal-based songs, it is Page's show. And then we skip ahead to about halfway through the album, not quite, but almost, to probably the best-known song from the album, 515. And probably the best played song of the night, right?
When you come back to this, I always remember The Real Me because it was the first one that really, it just kicked out. But when you revisit this is, it's such a great song. This is another one. They got it. They should bring this back. The horns add a nice little touch, but they could do this without horns.
I agree.
It's just beautiful.
And almost every Phish fan would know the main riff without the horns because it reappears in the middle of Drowned as the B section.
Right. That's what I really enjoyed about, like, not knowing anything about this album. There's all the parts of these songs kept showing up in other songs. It was just it really brilliant way to write an album.
This is probably
themes within.
Yeah, it's probably Pete Townshend's most mature writing.
And you said he was 27.
I could be off on that number, but he was somewhere around that, if not 30.
Nonetheless, it's incredible.
Yeah, but he probably lived the life of a 50-year-old by then, though. Certainly mentally, his defining traits, Pete Townshend's, are being bitter and insecure at the same time. So that comes through a lot of this.
Well, I'll say, Trey really stepped into the Pete Townsend role on this one. I mean, the solo he takes is, we're back to a Fishy kind of show when he hits this solo.
Yeah, the crowd must have been going crazy.
Yeah, it was. Like I said, it just kind of kept going up into the right. It was just really, the energy just kept going as they worked their way through this one.
We skip ahead a little bit to probably my favorite performance of the set, and I mean that fully informed, when they play Sea and Sand. It's so delicate, it's so gentle, it's very different from the Who version, which is full-on electric rock and roll. It's just Page and a piano.
Yeah. And they brought this out, a few times over the years, and it's kept that form. It's kept Page and the piano. It's a beautiful, beautiful song. I love what they did with it.
Mom got drunk on stout. My dad couldn't stand on 2 feet as he lectured about with me hanging round on the street or here on the beach. The girl I love is a perfect dresser, wears every fashion, gets it to a T. Heavens above, I have to match her. She knows just how she wants her man to be. Leave it to me. Her jacket's gonna be cut slim and check.
You're right. It's much different than what the album version is.
It's a beautiful showcase for Page.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, if
this
ever a world existed where Page had to audition for another band, this is the track I hope he would send to other bands.
Yeah. Yeah. He's such a talent. He doesn't get the respect he should.
And as we get closer toward the end, we couldn't go without picking out Drowned. It's clear that this song is out of Mike's vocal range pretty early on, like even as much as he probably practiced it and as much as he's made it his own in the years since. It seems a little difficult for him in the beginning of this track, but the playing and the arrangement make it probably the strongest or one of the strongest songs of the set. Like by 4 minutes, they're locked in. You could tell why this one has stuck around.
Yeah, this is just like a plane taking off. Like it was just, boom, it just went. And to your point, there's very good reason why this one stuck around.
And then returned 2 months later on New Year's Eve, most famously.
In a huge spot. Not in some to the side spot. This was front and center. Yeah. Great choice.
And our last highlight from this show is, I think, I couldn't believe it when I first heard it. And I'll tell that story in just a little bit. The last track of the whole album, Love Reign O'er Me, which I first heard this album. Now, I touched on this a little earlier, but I first became aware of this performance of Phish playing Quadrophenia in the summer of 1996. So I was just getting introduced to Phish, green noob, as unfamiliar as anything as you can be, except for a picture of Nectar. Simultaneously, my cousin, who's about 7 or 8 years older than me, used to take me to the West Village, the Greenwich Village in New York City, to walk around. It's a pretty hip, fun area to be, to find albums. I don't know if there's still a ton of record stores there, but there used to be. I used to look for bootlegs. I would look at all the water pipes. Didn't purchase any with him at the time. But I would look at all the albums. I would look for the bootlegs. I'd look for the posters. We'd get coffee because there's like 1,000 coffee shops around there. Just a fun place to go around. And there was this one place called Generation Records. I think it was on Bleecker Street. I don't think it is still there. But I went there and I started looking, in addition to the W section of the album for The Who, and who knows what new bootlegs would be available. I started looking in the P section, what Phish would be there, right? Before Pink Floyd. And so I found an album, a CD bootleg, which didn't exist back then, right? It was all tapes, CD bootleg. It was the cover of Quadrophenia which is a black and white photo of a mod with his back to you, looking in his moped with 4 rear view windows. But instead of the members of the Who's faces in the windows, it was the members of Phish. And on the back of the jacket, on the album, there's the Who logo. It's like a male symbol, right? The circle with the arrow pointing out, and it says the Who, like spray painted or hand painted. This one said Phish.
I didn't know that made the rounds.
Yeah, I know that buying bootlegs is kind of verboten in the Phish community. I did not know that then, but to find this, and I said, this almost looks like the Who played Quadrophenia. And the record store owner said, that's exactly what that is. And I looked on the back, I turned it over, I looked at all the track list, and then it said recorded October 31st, 1995 at Rosemont Horizon in Chicago. And I was so naive then. I said, is that a studio? Did they like on Halloween night decide to record all of Quadrophenia? Like, I didn't realize it was a live show. It didn't click for me. I was that out of the scene at that point. I was also like 14 or 13, so I didn't have that much worldly knowledge either. So I was so excited to get home. We skipped coffee. I didn't do any. I just wanted to go right home and put this on my CD player. The quality wasn't wonderful, but it was good enough, obviously. And when I heard Love Reign O'er Me, I almost vomited.
uh, completely understand. Completely understand. It's a beautiful song. It was in the moment after going on this journey, this hour-long journey of these Who songs, to see Fishman front and center, dark stage, couldn't see any other band members, front and center spotlight, for him to come out and to my memory, this was the first time he sounded like he could sing. Because, we've heard Cracklin' Rosie and all the Fishman tunes over the years. But when they ended the set with this, the voice coming from his chest, it was powerful. I understand your side of the. I definitely get that because it's not a great voice, but in that setting, the way they presented it, it was powerful. Like, it was really something. I will not forget it. I know you didn't want to talk about this one, but I really, that image will stay with me for forever.
Well, it's not that I didn't want to talk about this one. What I think it is at the time, obviously, my expectations were very different from reality.
Very high. Yeah.
But I think now when I look at it many, many years later, this is part of what makes Phish Phish. We mentioned at the very top of our conversation when they covered Radiohead during the Baker's Dozen. This is
exactly
the proto version of that.
Right.
And it was Fishman both times.
Yeah. There you go. How about that?
But the ending of it looked so fun, or sounded so fun, when Fishman really takes that screech that we're used to during Susie Greenberg. But like to your point, you said from his chest, to say that last, I don't even know the right word, that last yelp of love, like Roger Daltrey cements himself as a rock god during it. Fishman really does his best and does it like not in a little kid, oh, you did your best way. Like he does his version of it and it fits right in.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember him kind of going down a little bit and coming up to hit that note and just screaming to the world, because that's what it was scream. And it was just another one. I just get goosebumps thinking and just looking and remembering what that was like. It was something. And then for them to walk off, I didn't know anything, and then for them to walk off after that, it was just kind of like looking around like, wow, what just happened?
Do you remember what was the vibe like, whether you were with your friends or just in general, the crowd reaction?
I think there was a huge applause. I remember a lot of people kind of doing the Phish look around like, whoa, it was kind of like that because like I said, just kind of kept going. And by the time the album was over, that you could tell like all of the stress had just washed away from them. And they were just, now they were able to go out and do what they do in set 3, which you get right out of the box.
Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor, if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode. What they do in set 3, they come on and they open with You Enjoy Myself, which is my favorite version of this song of all time.
And for good reason. I mean, there's not a dull moment. There's a little 2-minute stretch where it's like, okay, a little muddy. It's a little weird, but there's no dull moments in this one. I wish I could name my favorite Yem. I can't. I don't know.
It's not a lightning round question. You don't have to.
Yeah. We're done with that part. No, this one was special. And you could tell when they came out on stage, it was much looser. Squirrel couldn't make the chess move because he's a Wookiee and Wookiees don't play chess. Famously spoken. And he was on a different planet. He walked out and had no idea. He just was walking around. It was really funny. He was dressed as a Wookiee. It was, of course. It was something. Yeah, it was something. Yeah.
The reason, though, I find it so easy to call this one my favorite one of all time is it's not often that one song can encapsulate the entire sound and the entire maybe evolution of a band over the course of a full year in one song, one performance. But this 40-minute You Enjoy Myself does it.
Yeah,
they play everything you could have heard in 1995 in one song.
Yeah, all 4 members were present. You got Machine Gun Trey, you got Patient Arena Rock, you got Big Rock, you got weirdness at the end. It was everything, to your point.
Yeah, that big arena rock that comes in around 9 minutes, 9:30. I don't know if it's a real me tease, but it sure sounds like the Who.
It's right there. It's right there. I think it's real meat teas. I think it's in there
Okay.
for
I mean,
me.
a lot of different notes. I mean, I've listened to this so many times. This is my commute track.
Oh,
It's just
nice.
the right amount of time. But
Yeah.
like when I started writing out some notes, some of these phrases that came out of me, I wrote like 12 minutes is like a caged animal. That there's tension and release. Like you can hear the immediate connection between Trey and Phish, and then it was jazzy, but still going 100 miles per hour, soaring guitar at 14 minutes, woodblock and synth at 17 minutes. Like everyone drops out at 20 minutes, but it's not true. It's just not traditional rock music at all.
Yeah.
This goes
Yeah.
everywhere. This You Enjoy Myself contains multitudes.
Yeah, for sure. It was so, they were just strutting at this point. They were back in their element, they were all pent up. They had a lot of stress on them for the album. They came out here and the crowd was fired up. I definitely remember the crowd just being like, okay, Phish show again. Here we go. Open with a yam. And that whole opening segment up to the boy part, they hit boy and the crowd just went boop. It just went up. It was something.
And then by the very end, they get back to blues rock, which then hints that Jesus Just Left Chicago, which would be played later in the set to give, I think, everyone a little bit of a break.
Yeah, for sure. Let Trey shine or Page shine again, for sure. That was the breather that was needed because as the set went on, it kept going. You got A Day in the Life, which was pretty common at that point, but that brought the craziness. If you've never seen A Day in the Life done by Phish, it's something to watch, especially with the lights that Rhoda can use. And that's something that I know you touched on in your podcast, but like those lights weren't like they are now, which begs to the point at the very end, that vocal jam, that was some scary stuff. I mean, they had the spinning strobes going, smoke machines going. It was all happening at the end. I didn't find out until the fairly rated X version of this until the soundboard came out when they released it on the live Phish.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I didn't hear it in the moment. I would have covered my ears. It's too much.
And then they go off after the third set. They come back on for an amazing encore, which has lived in my head for a long time because I have no idea what it looked like, but an acoustic version of My Generation.
see. Trying to call the big sensation. Talking about my generation. It's my generation.
Well, check out
acoustic bluegrass.
Yeah, check out the 20th year montage. They do it chronologically, and they show the blowing up of the machine of all the equipment. It was it was super cool. I've never seen like that since. Obviously, it was really really cool.
Yeah, my favorite part of that is when after they do the huge explosion, I think of the drum set, and Fishman and Trey do the double high five, like, oh, we did it. We got to do it.
Exactly. We've been waiting to do this. This was the culmination of all this work we put into this album to be able to do this.
Like one of the perks of being a rock star is you get to destroy your equipment on stage, right? From the Who, by the way. Yeah, and that's the joke, obviously. And now we got to do it because they always took so much care of their gear, Phish did.
For sure. And I mean, Fishman was lucky to get out of the way. Trey turned around right when that ended, and he hit that drum kit so fast. Fishman was barely out of the seat before that guitar came down on the kit. It was fun. It was fun.
Jamie, thank you so much for joining me today, and I guess pulling it out of me to moonlight as a Who podcaster for about 10 minutes, but really to focus on October 31st, 1995, Halloween, at Rosemont Horizon for Phish's cover of Quadrophenia and a whole lot more. It was only a matter of time before someone chose it, and I'm so glad you did, and you could kind of paint a picture, and more than that, kind of give us a sensory feel of what it was like to be there. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, man. I had a blast. It was great to learn a little bit about this as well. So thank you for your context.
And that's it for today's conversation about Halloween 1995. And for a 3-set show, as well as discussing 2 separate bands, it is imperative that we have an attendance bias fact check today.
Attendance bias fact check.
Jamie's first show was the legendary OJ show in Milwaukee. That show was on June 17th, 1994 at the Eagles Ballroom in Milwaukee. The next night is an equally revered show at the UIC Pavilion in Chicago. If you haven't heard either show, they are both required listening for all Phish fans. Some of Jamie's formative shows on tape when he was first getting into the band, although this is not a complete list because he rattled off quite a few, were November 2nd, 1990, the Glenn Miller Ballroom at the University of Colorado in Boulder, March 22nd, 1993 at the Crest Theater in Sacramento. That outstanding Gamehenge show has been covered on Attendance Bias with guest Mikey Reppy, and the one he focuses on the most, April 21st, 1992 at the Redwood Acres Fairground in Eureka, California. Interestingly, I don't think I've ever heard that one, so Jamie unwittingly gave me a new show recommendation. At the time of this recording, Jamie's most recent Phish show was, quote, Dick's Last Labor Day. That would be August 31st through September 3rd, 2023. Jamie name-checks My Morning Jacket and mentions that Trey has played on stage with the rock band. That was at the band's resort event, One Big Holiday, in March of 2022. Trey joined My Morning Jacket for their encore, playing Elton John's Rocket Man and the Rolling Stones' Can't You Hear Me Knockin'. According to Phish.com, the band reached out to Roger Daltrey to sing vocals for Love Reign O'er Me during this Quadrophenia cover, but not the entire album. Daltrey deferred, but it adds yet another layer of humor and fun to Fishman's passionate performance on that song. Jamie frequently references the size of Rosemont Horizon. The official capacity is 17,800 people, and according to Phish.com, this show was, quote, nearly sold out. The show at Blossom, where Jamie spotted the guy dancing on the roof of the pavilion, was on June 20th, 1995. The segue of Bathtub Gin into the Real Me, back into Bathtub Gin, was played on December 29th, 1995 at the Worcester Centrum. It is definitely one of the best versions of Bathtub Gin ever played, and it is in the conversation for one of the best Phish jams ever. The Michael Jackson tease right before the Quadrophenia set begins is Wanna Be Startin' Something, which is off Thriller. It's insane that we didn't mention this once over the course of the conversation, but Quadrophenia was played with a horn section which included Dave Grippo on alto saxophone, Don Glasgow on trombone, and Alan Parsley on the French horn. The first time I saw The Who live was during their 1996 Quadrophenia tour at the Nassau Coliseum. The date of that show, which had 3 encores, was November 15th, 1996. I was right about Pete Townshend's age. I guessed that the songwriter was about 27 years old when he was done writing Lifehouse and Who's Next. Depending on which month we're talking about, he was 26 years old. And finally, I'm thrilled to report that Generation Records in the West Village is still in business. It's located at 210 Thompson Street, but not Bleecker Street. And that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Jamie Boldt for joining me today, Phish.net for its help with the fact check, the Mockingbird Foundation for everything they do for furthering children's musical education, and Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by leaving a rating and a review of it on your favorite podcast app and visiting www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.